Well, welcome everyone to our training today. At this point in the first three sessions, we've looked at what is this capstone simulation. We've gotten into some of the details as far as what's available in the reports and the type of feedback we would give students after each round. Today I want to show you the student side of things and how the students would go about making those decisions that we will ultimately be giving them feedback after the round has been completed. So I'm logged in as a student right now, and in case you haven't seen it, this is what it looks like when a student logs in. There'll be a link to Capstone. If there was an exam, which there won't be in 5650, there'd be a link here. And twice a year, CapSim does this CapSim challenge, which is kind of a open invitation for students to compete against other students that have played CapSim from around the globe. It is anybody who's registered in the last year is eligible to participate. It's really just for bragging rights, but if you ever get any questions about the challenge, it is separate from your course. It is not required. It is simply an open competition for students to compete against one another to, determine who's best at this business simulation. So we usually get about 1,000 students every semester that compete, and the finalists always put it on their resume as sort of a achievement of note. Now, I'm going to log into the Capstone industry, since this is where the students would be doing all of their simulation work. And on this dashboard, it's going to show us what tutorials we've completed, along with some links to our reports that we would want to look at when we're making our decisions, and a link to actually get into the spreadsheet and make those decisions. So before we get into making the decisions, I just wanted to point out that all of these tutorials, the introductory lesson quiz, the rehearsal tutorial, the situation analysis, these are all part of the Getting Started section that students complete. That first tab is, I think it's about a 3-minute video that talks about the simulation students will be playing, and then there's a pass-fail type quiz that students complete to trigger completion. The rehearsal tutorial, I want to give you a quick look at this just so you understand what it's asking students to do. The rehearsal is a scripted exercise, so students can get their instructions over here on the left. It will tell them what will be the initial getting started activities that students complete to prepare themselves for the simulation. Of the 3 assignments, I've always said the rehearsal tutorial is the most important. That's because it actually has the students go into this practice environment and make some decisions. So they'll be repositioning a product, marketing a product, inventing a new product, scheduling production for their product. So all of the real essential decisions that students need to make, they're all covered in this rehearsal tutorial. And it's covered one of 2 ways. You could use these instructions on the left-hand side. There's also some videos that are embedded that students can watch on each department or each of these tactics that we're teaching them. Or there's a walkthrough feature. If they hit start on this blue box up here in the top right, it will actually go step by step and sort of point to where the students should be entering their decisions and things of that nature. But the rehearsal, it's a guided tutorial. like I said, there's two sets of instructions. Either you use the instructions on the left and key everything in over here on the right, or you can kind of minimize the instructions over here and just use that walkthrough feature built in that top right area. But we have students go through each of the 4 departments in the rehearsal, and then we ask them to complete a quiz and process their round. It is the advancing of the round or processing of the round, getting to round 2 in the rehearsal is what triggers completion. So if a student is showing as incomplete on their rehearsal, it just means they haven't advanced to round 2 yet. And in order to get to round 2, we had to go through the script, save our decisions, file, update decisions, same as in the real simulation, and then take the quiz. Okay, so this tutorial, as soon as we've made our decisions, taken the quiz, and gone to round 2, it will show as completed on our dashboard. Now, the rehearsal does go for up to 4 rounds, so I always encourage students to keep going. You know, the first round is scripted, but this is a risk-free environment where you can kind of, you know, try different things. They can reset the tutorial when they finish the 4 rounds. You're allowed to go back to the beginning if you wish to do so. But as long as they finish at least that scripted round, from our standpoint, they completed the rehearsal. If they want to keep going, that's up to them. And of course, it's encouraged, since the more practice they put in, the more prepared they'll be for the sim when they start making their group decisions. So the getting started activities, we had the intro lesson, we had the rehearsal tutorial, and the last item is called the situation analysis. This is exactly how it sounds. We're analyzing the situation we inherited. So how are those markets going to grow over 8 years? How can we calculate what customers are looking for, what the ideal position would be for our product year over year? It's an excellent planning activity, but think of it like 5 small homework assignments that are all useful to reference when we're making our decisions. So that is the pre-work. There's one other thing I really hope students look over, and you know, that's the team member guide available in that getting started area. There's this PDF guide, which is about 25 pages. It's a nice intro to the simulation. For the record, the online guide is a different resource. The online guide is much more robust than the PDF guide. I like to tell students, if it's in the simulation, it's in the online guide. So think of this like the capstone textbook. It's got a built-in search function. It's organized by chapter. But Chapter 4, Managing Your Company, it really gets into the details of each department. So if students are confused about any of the decisions they're making, remember the online guide is their best resource. The PDF guide has enough information to at least get them started, at least get them familiar. It's a good jumping off point, but again, we can't really cover everything in 25 pages. It is a robust simulation. So in this PDF guide, we do talk about 6 basic strategies near the end of the book. And I always ask students to review these, but I've found it's a little more effective to give them this resource with a visual aid. So I'm going to be sending this PowerPoint I put together that helps illustrate the 6 basic strategies by also showing where your products might be positioned in each of these 6 basic strategies. So it gives them, you know, a statement as far as where their competitive advantage would come from, sample vision statement, approaches to take for each department. But again, these are 6 basic strategies. They're all modeled after Porter's generic strategies. So we have broad differentiation, broad cost leader, niche, niche cost, niche differentiator, and then you have your life cycle strategies, ones with a cost leader emphasis, the others with differentiation as a focus. So the nice thing about the PowerPoint I'm sending you, it actually has the market segments and kind of shows you how it might look at the end of the game, how we'd want our products to be positioned. But there are thousands of ways for students to play this simulation. I don't want them to feel like they have to follow one of these 6, but they should be aware that these are all proven to work, right? These are all effective strategies, and we can usually, relate these strategies back to a real-world company. So I usually use automobiles. I might ask the students, who would you consider to be a niche cost leader? It might be Kia, somebody like that. Niche differentiation, that might be more like Porsche. But I'm sure faculty can relate these strategies back to whichever industry you're most familiar with or you like to discuss with your students. It's good food for thought as they're planning, what are we going to do with our company, right? When we take over, our company looks exactly like everybody else's. This goes back to that round 0 report we went through. Those are kind of the starting conditions for students. Well, when we take over, if everybody starts the same, and I just went through getting started, I may or may not have read the book. Fingers crossed, all of our students took the time to review the materials before they started making decisions. But I'm a realist. I know if I can get most of the students to do it, I'm happy. The rest are going to try to learn on the fly. So when they finally go into the spreadsheet and you can get to decisions as a student either by clicking on this link on their dashboard, or there's a link over here on the left menu to get to the same spot. If I go to decisions and launch the web spreadsheet, I am now in the spreadsheet where I would make all of my inputs. The most basic advice you can give your students is also some of the best. You want to start from the top with R&D and work your way down to finance. So what we do in R&D is going to be very dependent on what strategy we're trying to employ, right? I mean, if we go back, if we look at this perceptual map, I'm going to try to zoom in so you guys can see this a little easier. When we look at this perceptual map, we have one product in each of the 5 market segments. Our traditional product is positioned kind of right in the middle of the circle, which in that market, customers would like quite a bit. By referencing our industry conditions report, this is one that I would hope students print and kind of keep with them as they make their decisions. There's a little star within each of these markets that shows you where the customer really prefers your product to be positioned. But in some market segments, like high-end, the positioning is much more important than in a market like low-end. Right? Low-end is going to be very price-sensitive. And we talked about this in detail in the last couple trainings, but if this is the first session you're attending, those types of details, like what the customer is looking for, that's contained in their reports. So the Capstone Courier report is, all of these pages. If I open up page 1, it's going to open up the Courier. On each of those market segments, it's going to explain what is really important to this group of customers. So in traditional, the ideal spot's right in the middle, but it's only 21% of what they care about. In low end, it's even less important. High end, it happens to be the most important criteria. That's something that the students should keep in mind as they're making their decisions, right? If we want to have a really appealing product, it needs to align with what the customer is ultimately shopping for. As we go through these different departments, the first thing we would want to decide is what strategy are we trying to run? In the broad strategies, we maintain a presence in each of those 5 market segments. So as far as implementing our strategy, I'd say the broad strategies are kind of easier to implement, just based on the fact that we are already in the markets where we want to be. Now, you'll notice that there's more than 5 dots on this example. In the example strategy, they have all 8 products being sold. So, while you start with 5 products on your company, we're talking about the research and development department. This is where students should begin making their decisions. And again, as a best practice, you really have to start from the top with R&D and work your way down. If there was an exception, I would say it's the TQM, or Total Quality Management department, which tends to turn on mid-game, usually around 3 or 4. I believe we set it up to turn on in round 4 in your courses. Total Quality Management, when students make investments in TQM, the benefits kick in right away. So if, for example, one of those investments would lower our R&D cycle times when we make updates to our products, it's kind of nice if that's factored in as we're making our decisions, since those would impact the same year. I'd say it's okay if you did TQM first. Otherwise, you might want to revisit some decisions if you did TQM last. Anyway, for the first couple years, they always want to start from the top with R&D and work their way down. That's because every department really requires information from the ones before it. As a quick example, if I went to marketing, I don't know what price I should put in for product Able or Acre or Atom or any of these products unless I know which market we are targeting with that product. So if I'm targeting the traditional market with Able, then I'd want to make sure that my price was within this price range for the traditional market. And of course, we'd want to keep in mind that we're actually looking at last year when we view our reports. This year, the price range would actually be 50 cents less. That's just one of the rules of the game that we talk about in that pre-work the students do. The price ranges are always dropping by 50 cents per year. And that's one of the things that I think makes Capstone very challenging for students, is that it forces them to think about, how can I continue to drive down my costs so that I can maintain healthy profit margins even at a lower price point. So it gets them thinking about strategy and really, optimizing those operations or those production processes. Okay, so getting back to R&D, this is where we'd make updates to our product. I'm going to start making some adjustments to product Atom. Actually, you know what? Let's start from the top. We'll start with product Able. We can see in round 0 that the ideal position for this market was at a performance of 5 and a size of 15. In the other report I showed you, that industry conditions report, we tell students some vital information. So which segment is which? Of course, they need to know that. But we also talk about things like the drift rates. So how fast are each of these markets moving across the perceptual map? As a general rule, the more high-tech the segment is, the faster it's going to move across this map down and to the right. So, in traditional, it says our drift rate is plus 0.7 and minus 0.7. If I know that last year the ideal spot was at 5.0 and 15.0, and I know that every year the ideal position moves plus 0.7 to performance and minus 0.7 to size, then in round one, what the customer wants is going to be 5.7 and 14.3. Let's see if we can get there in 1 year. And, we're starting at 5.5 and 14.5. That is very close to where I'm about to move the product. So I have no doubt that this will finish within the year we're working on. Looks like it would finish on the 15th of March, okay? I could leave this as is, or, we could go a different direction with this product. If I wanted to be a differentiator, I would probably keep this close to where I have it now, right? I've got the product positioned very well. That's one of the characteristics of my strategy. If I was a cost leader, I might position the product a little behind the ideal spot, because as we make our product faster and smaller, it does make our product more expensive to produce. It's going to lead to a higher material cost. So let's say we wanted to trail behind a little bit, and we move our product to 5.0 and 15. We're going to see our material cost change from $11.34 down to $10.48. So while the customer would not like our positioning quite as much where it's located now, we would be able to produce the product for cheaper. That might enable us to offer a lower price if that's where we want to try to gain our competitive advantage. But ultimately, if I'm targeting this traditional market, I just need to make sure that our product is positioned inside that solid circle. There's no penalty to our demand if we're within the circle. But I want you to think of it as the closer our product is to the ideal spot, the more demand the product would generate, at least from a positioning standpoint. There's also things like reliability, the age of our product. So, looking back at traditional, age is most important. That would influence what I did in R&D probably more than anything else. We want to keep the age close to 2 to really try and influence this customer to purchase our product and not somebody else's. Price and positioning seem fairly influential, but reliability isn't really moving the needle, right? It's only 9% importance to this group. So as long as we are within the range, there's no penalty. But as CEO, we don't have as much of an incentive to give them that premium reliability as we might have in another segment. Now, I saw a question get typed: do the market segments grow or shrink? They'll be growing in your simulation. They'll grow at a constant rate year over year. Now, that is customizable. We do have things like a recession scenario, or, pardon me, the ability to customize the growth rates as the instructor. I don't really take issue with using the standard scenario. I think there's more than enough moving parts in the sim to where, simplifying the growth rates is okay, in my opinion, to keep them constant. But we can program the sim to randomize the growth rates each year, to have a recession or two if you're feeling very diabolical. It really, all those things are decided when you set up the simulation. But since I'll be the one setting up the simulation for you, if you ever wanted to make some edits to the scenario, just send me an email or email support@capsim.com, and we can go over all the different options with you. But getting back to R&D, we would make some updates to our product. I'm going to say, just in the essence of time, we'll go with a broad differentiator type approach to round one, where we're going to place an emphasis on premium positioning. We're going to aggressively market our products. We're going to have to price our products relatively high compared to our competition in order to cover the additional overhead and, to maintain a healthy profit margin. So no strategy is perfect, but in the essence of time, because we are already in these 5 segments, we're going to go through a broad differentiation approach to these sample decisions. So I'm going to put this product back to what the customer would really want. They want this ideally positioned product. In low end, product acre is currently kind of near the middle, maybe a little in front of the middle. We know the ideal spot is up here in the top left, but if I look at what's important to these consumers, the age of the product, they're hoping that it's 7 years old. And every time we update our product in R&D, customers will perceive that as cutting the age in half. You can see in our example with product Able, it started the year at 3.1 years old. It got older until March 15th. The age then cut in half when we updated the design on the revision date, and then the product got older for the remainder of the year, and it ends the year at 2.5. So if the ideal age of 2 is very important to the consumer, and we start the game with an age of 3, I'd say our product is a little too old in the eyes of those consumers, and getting this product out of R&D quickly should benefit us in round 1. Now, you may be wondering, well, how do I know 3 years old is too old and not 2.5 or 2.1? While we can't give the algorithm to students, if I look at my industry conditions report, the one that I recommended students print, I like if they print this report because it gives them a bell curve for things like age in each market. So in traditional, the ideal age is 2. You can see that's kind of the top of the bell curve here. As long as it's older than about 0.6 and not older than about 3.3, it looks like we're in this green area. And if we can just keep our product in that green area at all times, I'd say we're doing a great job of meeting those customers' most important criteria, right? So, it sounds kind of corny, but let the buying criteria be your guide, so to speak. This is the one time in their life they have perfect information about their consumers. They know exactly how many there are. They know what's important to those consumers. They know what types of changes they made. So, even with all of that information, there's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty as far as what will happen when we advance this round and when we process the results. because we don't know what the other teams are doing, right? If everybody did the same thing we did to product Able, we would end up with the exact same sales as everybody else. But if we are the first to get our product out of R&D and get that age a little closer to 2, we should see a spike in our market share. If we're the best aligned product for a couple months, we should outperform those older products, at least until they got updated. I hope that makes sense. But as we're going through these different departments, I'll try and highlight why, for example, we definitely wanted to update product Able. It was too old at the start of the year. But for product Acre, I think our best decision would be to just leave it alone. Now, I could adjust the MTBF if I wanted to. That stands for mean time between failure. If I didn't know that, I can always click these little pop-ups in the spreadsheet, and it will tell me what this is looking at or what this does. So MTBF, that's the reliability of our product. The more reliability we give, the higher the material cost will become. It translates to about 30 cents for every 1,000 hours of MTBF. So we're going to leave Acre alone because we want it to get older. We see product Acre starts the year at about 4.5 and it ends at 5.6. Product Atom. This is a high-end product that is pretty far away from the ideal spot. The ideal spot's all the way down here in the bottom right of that market. If I go to the high-end segment, to save some time, I'll tell you the drift rate was plus 0.9 and minus 0.9. So this year, the customer's hoping in year 1, remember we're looking at year 0 here, in year 1 they want 9.8 and 10.2. Let's see what happens if we type that in. We want 9.8, if I could, there we go, 9.8 and 10.2. If I recalculate, I'll see that this revision doesn't happen until the 14th of May in 2021. So the drawback of doing such a large R&D project is that we are limited to one R&D project for each product each year. So if I schedule something that goes into 2021, this product would be grayed out and locked in R&D when we started year 2. Now, that's a question you might get from students. I know I've answered that question more times than I can count. Usually it sounds a little something like, the simulation is broken, I can't move my product, and when I look at my reports, it doesn't show these numbers where I moved my product to. And I'm going to leave this like this just so I can show you the report at the end of the round. But the short version is they were selling their product from these old specifications until the 14th of May in 2021, so in year 2. At the end of round 1, the product is still selling at those old specs. So the report that gets generated at the end of the year will report on where your product is selling as of December 31st. So this update where we move our product towards the ideal spot, if it were me, I'd back off a little bit. I'd move this closer to where I started. So if I started inching it back, let's say we go to like 9.5 and 10.5, you'll see the product's going to move a little up and to the left, and the revision will take less time because we're moving less distance. So that takes us to February. It looks like we'd have to go back a little farther. Let's try 9.2 and 10.8. Now I've got the product in November. I might have been able to move it a little more forward and still get it done in 2020 in year one. But, you know, again, I'll leave this at the ideal spot just so you can see what happens when a product has a multi-year R&D project. So let's see, they wanted 9.8 and 10.2. And this puts us back into 2021. Since we're on a bit of time constraints, I'm going to kind of plod through these other products. But we'd take the same approach when we decide where to position our product. I want to know, is it worthwhile to aim for the ideal spot? Is that really going to move the needle for the customers? And in the performance market, it's fairly important. So in this case, the ideal spot would have been 10.4 and 15.3. Again, this is something the students calculate before they even begin the simulation. They calculate these kinds of numbers to help them as they're making these inputs. But looks like no issues in the performance market. We can get to the ideal spot within the same year. Since we're trying to differentiate by offering premium positioning, we're going to go ahead and give them exactly what they want. Let's see if we can do it in size. That'd be 4.7 and 9.6. This one's going to be close. All right, we get it out of R&D in November. Now, I should have mentioned before I hit recalculate that as we schedule more projects, you'll notice that all of them take a little bit longer to finish. That is one of the rules of the game. The more projects you give your engineers, the longer it takes them to complete all projects, because you're taking a finite amount of resources and you're spreading them thinner and thinner. Now you can have up to 8 products. Students can introduce a new product. Let's go ahead and do that for one of these. Let's call it Axle. We'll go with high end. So I'm going to aim for what would be considered ideal at the end of year 2. So it's going to take me more than a year to invent my new product. I'm not going to aim for what the customer wants at the end of year 1. I'm going to aim for what they want at the end of the year 2 with this particular product. Excuse me. And since reliability is fairly important in high end, I'm going to give them a decent reliability, 24,000 out of the 25 that would have been the top end of the range. So here we have our R&D page. We moved all of our products except for product Acre. We just introduced a new product called Axle. I think we made a mistake on product Adam with this multi-year revision. But for Agape and Aft and Able, these are all going to be very well positioned by the end of the year. Now, in some cases, that's going to happen very early in the year. Able, we did not move very far. That's why it only took until March. A product like Agape or Agape, that was a much farther move. That's why it took until November. Okay? So when we look at these revision dates, just know it's a function of how far we moved the product, and there is a component to the higher the automation rating on your product, the longer it takes to move the same distance. So the higher we automate, the longer it takes. the logic there is that the more computerized your production line was, the longer it would take to retool that line to start producing at new specs. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's keep chugging along. We're going to marketing. In the essence of time, I'm just going to provide you with some of the information that would be on these pages, but actually we'll do a quick skim. So traditional was 20 to 30 last year. Low end was 15 to 25 for the price. High end was 30 to 40, and then the last two were both 25 to 35. Again, that was last year, so the price ranges would be 50 cents less for this round. I'm going to price our products close to the top of the range. And the reason we're going to do this is we're going to be pretty aggressive in terms of our marketing expenditures. That's another component to this broad differentiation strategy. So let's say we get really aggressive with our price, and we're going to price at the very top of the range for every single market segment. Now, that might be ill-advised in low end, but again, just in the essence of time and to stick with our strategy, we'll be consistent here. But in a very price-sensitive market, you'd typically want to be at least a little bit underneath the top of the price range. Okay, the promotion and sales budgets, these are the longest explanations in the entire spreadsheet, but part of the reason there's so much text here is because we break down the formula that students can use to figure out what they should spend to get the desired awareness and accessibility for their products. So you always lose a third of what you had at the start of the year, and for awareness or for promotion, your first million adds 22%, second million's another 23, third million only adds 5. So my first takeaway, I don't get a lot of bang for my buck on that third million. I might cap the spending at 2 million unless, we really wanted to make a concerted effort to get to 100% as fast as humanly possible. But again, essence of time, I will say these first two products, your traditional and low-end products, these start off in the very large, slower growing markets. I like to say these are your cash cows at the start of the sim. The three smaller segments are the more high-tech groups. They're also much faster growing. So the industry as a whole grows about 14% per year. In high-end performance and size, we're looking at 16%, almost 20%, over 18%. So while these start off small, every year you move forward, these markets become increasingly more attractive in terms of aiding our bottom line. Before I keep going, I'll pause here. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Okay, if you see any hands go up, just let me know, okay? I can't actually see the meeting window. But, in this hypothetical we're doing, where we're running a broad differentiation strategy, it would have been okay to maybe price a little lower in low end, or to maybe not be all the way at the top of the price range for this year. But in general, a differentiation strategy is going to price at a premium. They're going to market their products very aggressively. So let's say we spend $1.5 million for each promo and sales on those larger products, and then we do $1 million a piece on these smaller products. Now, after we input our sales forecasts, and we spent some time talking about forecasting in the last session. At the start of the game, I'd say round one is really the most difficult round to forecast. What I typically do is just look at what I sold last year, which is all on page 4, and then I might factor in the growth for that market just to come up with a quick estimate. So let's say we do about 400 or 375-ish for these smaller markets, and then for the big guys, we're going to just key in some forecasts. Again, we could do this much more scientifically, but in the essence of time, we won't crunch all these numbers. I'll just key in some numbers that would represent our sales after we factor in our growth, and this one might be a little low. Let me bump that up another 100. So we've got some forecasts. The next step, now that we've got prices, promo and sales budgets, and forecasts from marketing, we go to the production area. Now, I try to think of this as a total of what are we making available to customers, right? It's not just what we're building this year. It's also any inventory on hand that we started the year with. So I want to make sure that my inventory on hand plus any production from this year, and we can see the actual output, that's this production after adjustment. This is what I'm really building based on this production schedule. The adjustment, the size of that adjustment depends on my accounts payable policy. So if I decide to, let's say, make my suppliers wait 60 days instead of 30, you'll see that the adjustment is much larger. Since output went down on the same schedule, our labor cost per unit actually increased as we extended accounts payable, at least the average cost per unit. I'm going to put this back to 30. I just wanted to demonstrate that there is an adjustment based on your accounts payable policy. The logic here is as we make our suppliers wait longer and longer to get paid, they start withholding more and more materials from our order. So for Able, we started off the year with about 200 in inventory. We need to build at least 1,200. I try to typically build about an extra month worth of inventory when I total up our schedule and our inventory on hand. So the total of these two numbers, I'm hoping, is at least 1,200. And if it's a little more, if it's an extra month or two, I'm fine with that. We're not guaranteeing that we sell those units, but it could work out where maybe our demand is better than we expected, or perhaps one of our competitors will stock out and we end up selling some units to their customers. An extra month or two you can manage. As soon as you get above 3 months worth of inventory, that's when things start getting really expensive, and that's typically when we start seeing emergency loans get issued to teams as they encounter cash flow problems from inventory buildup. So I'm going to quickly key in some more schedules, just making sure that our production plus inventory is at least that forecast, and if it's a little more, that's fine. So now that we've got some production schedules, it's time to decide if we want to make any changes to capacity or automation. Now, we did start a new product called Axle in R&D. Axle will come out of R&D at some point next year. Looks like October. So in order to sell something next year for product Axle, we're going to need to purchase some capacity. In this example, I'm going to do 300, and some automation, which we're going to automate to 3, since that's just like our other high-end product. We'll do the same thing on this one. Our current high-end product has a nice margin at 37%, so I don't see any harm in sort of mimicking it. But this capacity and automation would cost about $5 million. The most we're allowed to spend this year is about $32 million. So this investment still leaves room for other investments if we wish to do so. I might want to increase the automation rating for my product, because every point of automation we increase lowers our labor cost by about $1.20. So, you know, the investment to buy the automation, if you think about, you know, it costs me $4 per unit of capacity to buy 1 point of automation. So on the one hand, it costs me $4. On the other, it's going to save me $1.20 in perpetuity moving forward. So those savings, I mean, we could see on both first and second shift as we increase automation. So theoretically, you could recoup more than $1.20 in 1 year. But what I'm getting at here is I don't want the students to think that this is a bad idea because it's expensive, right? Sometimes we need to invest millions into the production line to get it optimized, and once it's optimized, well, it might be easy to pay off that debt now that we have more profit to work with. That's just a quick example, but I hope that's making sense to everybody. In this case, I would maybe buy a little more automation everywhere. We're a differentiation strategy, so cost leadership is not our top priority, but we know that price ranges will decline as time goes on. We still need to think about ways to produce our product for less so that we can keep pace with the market. Now, when you're deciding whether or not to make any capacity changes, the thought process here is, all right, well, what do I think I'll sell in a full year, and how does that measure up to my first shift capacity? So product Able, I'm building 1,100 units, and I could build up to 1,800 units just on first shift. And we have 2 shifts of workers, so in theory, I could build up to 3,600 units of that product in a single year. If I take what we're selling and I factor in the growth rate for the traditional market, which is 9.2%, end of year 2, we're at 1,200. 3 is 1,300, 4, 5, 6. It took until year 7 until we were finally using our first shift capacity. I think that's an outrageous amount of capacity. It is far more than we will probably need. And that analysis we just did was based on there only being 6 products in the market. There could very easily be more products than that as new products get introduced, as products perhaps change markets, you know, maybe going from high-end to traditional, for example. That might dilute market share even further. So in this example, I'm going to sell some of that excess capacity. We're going to sell 500 units. That would still leave us with 1,300 for capacity on first shift, where we could build up to 2,600 total. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's more than enough for the rest of the game. If we did end up needing more capacity, that's probably because we're doing such a good job of generating demand that I'm sure we would have money. Pardon me. I'm sure we would have cash on hand to be able to fund that sort of expansion when the time came. All right. So now that we got rid of a little excess capacity, we see that we'd actually receive money from that sale. It's up to us whether we want to purchase capacity for a product that maybe needs it, or maybe invest a little more in automation. Ultimately, it is up to the group to decide where they want to make their investments. And finally, it brings us to the finance department. When I get to finance, I see a projected closing cash position for the end of this year. Now, I generally aim for about 5 to 8% of sales. If I look at my pro formas, these are like if-then statements. If I look at my projected income statement, the top line is $123 million. So if I wanted 5 to 8% of that left as cash at the end of the year, what do we need? Probably 6 to 10 million, somewhere in there. And currently, it looks like we would end the year with 10.5 million of cash on hand, and that's even in kind of some pessimistic scenarios where we're not forecasting to sell much more than the industry is growing. So I'm actually going to leave this as is, but if we needed additional capital, we could have issued stock. We could have borrowed current debt that would be paid back next round. We could have issued long-term debt. These are like 10-year bonds that, because the simulation only lasts 8 years, technically the next ownership group would be on the hook for paying back that face value. That said, we did inherit some long-term bonds when we started this simulation. We will need to pay those off as they mature during the game. So that was a quick run-through of how to make decisions. I'm going to save them and then I'll process our round. So in this case, I'm going to process the round manually since it's just me in this game. Normally, we would schedule the round to process automatically at a set time and date. In this case, I'm going to process the round manually just by clicking a couple buttons. So we went Manage Industry, Process Round. From here, we just go to Step 2, go to Step 3, go to Step 4. And that's all there is to it. Let's see if we went bankrupt. I hope not. Ooh, we did. All right. So this is why it's important to take your time on sales forecasting, just on a footnote. I'm willing to bet we had an inventory buildup in low end where we priced our product at a premium, but we expected our sales to grow at a normal rate. If I was looking for the culprit, I could say, well, we made this $8 million plan improvement and we didn't borrow anything to help pay for it. Had we taken out a long-term bond or issued some stock or, taken out some current debt that could have avoided this emergency loan. Let me zoom in so you can see this a little better. Actually, bear with me one sec, guys. Let's download the PDF because it's nicer to look at than the HTML page. Just bear with me a moment. There we go. So we could point to the big increase in inventory for why we went bankrupt. We could tell this team that the good news is you still have $18 million worth of inventory on your balance sheet. That's much more than the $4 million you owe Big Al. If you focus on forecasting more accurately in round 2 and you subtract your inventory from what you need to build, you have more than enough inventory to sell where you could pay off that emergency loan without any additional borrowing. Now, looking for the culprit, look no further than low end. We were stuck with over 1 million units left over. And I'm certain the reason was we had our price at the very top of the range. That would have made our product quite a bit less appealing than these alternatives that were, $3 cheaper, almost $5 cheaper, $2.50 less than our price. Every competitor had a more attractive price than we did in that market, and that led to our buildup of inventory and the issuance of our emergency loan. But at the end of the round, I would really be encouraging students to dig into those reports. There is more available on the website that they could look at. But that is how to make decisions in a nutshell. I hope it made sense as far as why we went in the order we did and why we made some of the changes we made. I'm glad we were able to illustrate the impact of sales forecasting and how inventory buildup can trigger an emergency loan. But I want to show you the R&D page now that we're in round 2, just so you can see what it looks like when a product is locked. So the giveaway here, it already has a revision date, and I can't change the cells. That means the team scheduled a project that went into next year. In our report, it's not going to show these coordinates. It would show the old coordinates for our product because that's where it's being sold currently, at least when the report was generated. Does that make sense to everybody? Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, Eric, it's Jeff Wilkie. I got one question. Most of my experience with using this is teaching the BA capstone course, the Business 6200, and in that we're required to use the CompXM exam. Is the CompXM exam required in this course?
So CompXM will be, do you want to take that one, Joe?
Yeah, sure. The CapSim will be used not in this course, but in Management 6000 as an assessment for the whole management leadership program.
Okay.
So we in 6200 they have it's all in one course. We split it into 2 courses.
Okay, so your capstone require. Okay.
Management 6000 is the capstone for the program. Will require students to do a assessment, which is CompXM.
Okay.
Okay.
And then of course, the 5650 course will just be the capstone, then the capstone simulation, and then when they get to the capstone course, they do the capstone simulation and the assessment CompXM. So I think the logic is the more practice students have in the simulation, the more prepared they'll be for the exam. And, I would expect the scores to be better on average in this sort of format than in the old one.
And so in 5650 they do the capstone, and then 6000 they do the CompXM. And I'm working with Eric to create a modular exam. They call it ModX. We'll use that to assess, create a pre and a post assessment, and we'll put that into 5000 starting June of 2020. And we are, in fact, I was talking to Eric yesterday, and we were thinking about maybe doing that in both, so there'll be a true pre and pro for those assessments in the capstone and the CompXM. So we are still finalizing those details. As soon as we have them finalized, we'll announce it to the community. Doug, do you have any thoughts on how the instructors could view this?
Well, next
strategy.
Yeah, next time we'll do one more webinar, and I will talk more about how this ties to our framework of strategic thinking, how to use a simulation in that regard. But that'll be the next webinar.
Yeah. So we are taking about a week to 10 days break, and then I'm going to post all these recordings on YouTube channel and also on the Canvas World Classroom course, the training course, for reference purposes, and also if there are future instructors who need to learn the sim, they can do that. And then, so in about 10 days, we'll launch another series of these webinars, and Doug he will talk about the way the course is built and run through the strategy models, and then how all this ties back to the sim, and then, so we can sort of complete the loop.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the plan, and so thank you for joining today. And so once I have all the documents that Eric sent to me and the recordings in place in the training course, I'll make sure that you are notified. And if you have instructors who need to learn the sim, please let us know, and we'll sign them on to the training course. So if there is someone who is currently teaching 5650 and they don't know how to do the sim, let us know that also, because we want to get in there and help them as much as possible. But hopefully that's not the case, because most of the 52 BUS and 6200 instructors can teach this 5650. So that's what we are trying to make sure happens, rather than somebody new to the CapSim sim teaching the 5650 course. Any other thoughts or comments?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. All right, Eric. So if there's any other documents you want me to add to the, you want me to distribute, send it to me.
Already did.
If not, okay, great. If not, have a great weekend, and we will loop you back in about 10 days for the next round of training.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Thank you very much.